Welcome to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to reduce the stigma around suicide. In this series, we speak to a range of people who've been affected by or with lived experience of suicide. I'm your host, Gemma, and in each episode, I'm joined by Professor Pooja Saini, lead of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University.
I wanted to do this series to showcase the voices of people who have been brave enough to speak about their experiences and who are constantly inspiring hope in other people who may find themselves in a similar situation. I'm in a unique position as an academic expert in suicide prevention who has had the opportunity to speak with people with personal experiences of suicide and those involved in setting up suicide-specific community-based services. My role has been to ensure that these services are designed to work well for the people who need them and that they embed evaluation and research to show the impact of their work.
In this series, you're going to hear from a really diverse range of people who really illustrate that anyone can be touched by suicide, regardless of age, background, or gender. These are important and impactful stories that we hope will open up conversations about suicide. And if you know someone who you feel would benefit from listening to this series, please pass it on. This episode is called Breaking the Cycle, and we are joined by Ellie Parmakas, who is CEO of Ep06, and Jasmine Humphries, who works there as well. Now, in this chat, we talked about the generational cycle of suicide and how the risk increases if you are bereaved by suicide. We also talked about having alternative settings for people in crisis and how important that is. And it was interesting because both of the people in this episode had lived experience of suicide, but in different ways.
Yeah, and I think it's really important how, when I hear about people who've created services in community settings, how important it is that the people coming through the door actually are speaking to people with lived experience. And it seems to be a factor that really helps in kind of the conversations that then lead to maybe them getting some help.
Yeah, 100%. And Ellie and Jasmine were really open and honest in this chat, and it's a great one. So let's hear what happened. Ellie and Jasmine from Ep06, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with you, Ellie. Can you just explain a bit about your story and how it's kind of brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, so I started Ep06, the suicide prevention organisation based in Wigan, mainly because I found out that so many people were struggling with suicidal thoughts in the Wigan and Leigh area, and that we had such a high rate of suicide in that area. And I had struggled with suicidal ideation from being the age of 12, and I struggled with it for decades. And then in my 40s, I had a lot of health problems, physical health problems. When I turned 30, I'd sort of kind of got better. For me, I'd found my faith, and that really helped me. But when I got to my 40s, I had these physical problems. I had a major spine surgery, nearly paralysed, and it took me, a good 18 months to get better and get my legs right and walk properly. And then I just got better, and then I got hit by a van when I was on my bike, which was just awful and catastrophic, really, for me and my daughter. And after that, I became quite suicidal again. So the last few years, I've really had to get myself better. And it was finding out and speaking to other people that I realised just how prevalent suicide was. And I just thought, you know what? I need to help. I need to do something in this town. And I decided the best thing to do after speaking to lots of people was people needed somewhere to go, somewhere to talk, somewhere they could just share, but especially where they felt safe. So we decided to call it a harbour, because I've always felt that when you rock bottom, you need to come in from a storm and just somebody just not wrap you up physically, but you feel wrapped up in something when somebody listens to you. So we opened a harbour in a little community centre. It was just for a couple of hours. And then suddenly lots of different communities around Wigan and Leigh were asking us to open a harbour in their area as well. And so over the last 2 years, we've opened 8 harbours. And then just recently, we've opened a crisis harbour, which is opened from Thursdays right through to Mondays, open from 3 in the afternoon till 11 at night. So we're in the space of 2 years, we've taken on staff as well as volunteers, and we've just grown rapidly. And that's because of the need to help people who are suicidal. So it's just been an incredible journey of lived experience, but we're definitely making a difference. We've just saved 17 lives in January, just at the crisis harbour, which has meant a lot to every one of us, actually. We've saved a lot of lives over the last 2 years, but to know we did that in the space of 6 weeks really meant a lot to all the staff and volunteers. But yeah, Epic Hope's really doing some good work. And funnily enough, tomorrow it's our 2-year anniversary.
Aww.
And I only realised when I was in the car before.
Happy anniversary.
I know, thank you.
And Jasmine, do you want to just explain what you do at Epic Hope and what led you to want to get involved?
So at Epic Hope, I'm a mental health crisis peer supporter, and I've been working with them since November now. What inspired me to get into it was in February 2023, I actually lost my partner to suicide. His name was Anthony Rodden, which is part of why I'm so passionate about Postvention. One of the things that we've done recently is we've opened a Postvention harbour. So that's specifically to help people who've been bereaved by suicide. Just because I think it's such a unique kind of bereavement as well, and you're actually at such an increased risk of also taking your own life in those initial weeks that follow.
Yeah, so there's a cycle that needs to be broken there, isn't there, sometimes?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, in my partner's experience, he'd lost his mum to suicide as well, nearly 3 years prior. And it is something that I feel kind of cycles through families and friend groups. So it's so important to break that cycle.
Yeah, I think this is something that I've heard people saying to me about that kind of generational element and how they want to break the cycle and go into some postvention work, or even thinking about children who might be bereaved by suicide as well, and how important that is. So I suppose with the work you've been doing, it'd be really interesting to hear about any of the people you've seen who may have been bereaved by suicide who are coming through.
I mean, at the moment, we are in those very initial stages of the Postvention harbour, but we have had some people come in. There's one lady that's lost 2 of her children, and, you know, the first one, I think she'd lost quite a few years ago, and then the second one just struggled so much with the bereavement that they also turned to suicide as well.
That must be really, really difficult for the family.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Ellie, you spoke about, the fact you've saved 17 lives in January, which I think is amazing. But one thing I find a real kind of gripe within suicide prevention and research is they want to know factually how you know that, you've reduced rates and saved people, which I always think is really interesting, because I think if you've helped people in that crisis moment, that's a major thing. But what would you say to that?
Well, I think that's really important, actually. So when we've had, the reason we know over the 6 weeks, it was actually 24 people that were actually going to take their lives. We know people that we've actually done an intervention with who were actually going to take their lives, knew that they wanted to go to A&E, realised that they could come to us instead of going to A&E, and actually said to us, yeah, I've made a plan. This is what I'm going to do. We've got certain questions that we know to ask in that conversation, but every one of them was in crisis when they came to us. So we actually have a larger footfall than that who actually come to the harbours and the crisis harbour. But we know straight away who's actually in crisis or who's depressed and low and has been considering suicide, but we can do a safety planning with them. But those actual people are people that have decided they're going to take their life, and if we can't help them there and then, that's what's going to happen.
So what do you think is different in the crisis harbour to if they'd have gone to A&E?
Because when they come to any harbour, but the crisis harbour as well, because that is officially an alternative to A&E for anyone in a self-defined crisis or feeling suicidal, they're not having to wait in a waiting room. They're not having to be in that chaos of A&E. When they come to us, they're meeting a group of people who are ready to do a suicide intervention, but it's a very caring, relaxed atmosphere. The environment's completely non-clinical. You know, when you go to A&E, it can be a scary place, actually. If you're struggling with your mental health, and I know this myself, even bright lights can be overwhelming to someone who's feeling suicidal, because when you're suicidal, you're scared as well. because you've got all these things going on in your mind. And so I think when they come to the harbour, the fact that somebody's there who says, you know what, I get what you're going through. I don't understand your personal story, but I've been in a similar situation and I really care about you and I want to help you. Can I help you? And they think, yeah, I actually do want some help. I actually want to stay. I just don't want to feel this feeling anymore. And, you know, they're not rushed away. They get to stay for a while. And we always ask people to come back the next day as well. And I think it's just the fact that it's that non-clinical place and somebody listening and having time for you. There's nothing more beautiful, is there, than someone having time for you. And sadly at A&E, people can't have time for you because they haven't got time for you. They haven't got time for people who are having heart attacks. They've got so much on that our services are so overwhelmed, aren't they? Ambulances are queuing up outside. How can they deal with someone who's having a mental health crisis? It's not priority, but there are priority.
Absolutely. And I think one thing in this podcast series that we're really trying to get across is I think the important place of services like your own and other people we've had, you know, in the series, whether it's Alfie's Squad, Martin Gallia Project, James's Place.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to really get a feeling of actually these resources and services. One, they're, I think, maybe a better first place for people to go who are in crisis and more appropriate, but also the kind of pressure they might reduce on some of the A&Es and health systems around us.
Definitely. Because if you think about it, going back to that number, obviously the crisis harbour was opened from the middle of December. So we're new to this crisis harbour number, so we're going to keep using it. But those 24 people, they would have gone to A&E. We've got the percentage though, the data of I think there were so many that wouldn't have gone. They would have just taken their lives, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
but
I think it was about 5.
About 5 of them wouldn't have even gone to A&E. So the other people would have gone to A&E, but they probably would have been sent home. So then the chances are a lot of people do then go on to take their lives. But if they're coming to us, you know, you've got 100% chance of that person staying alive because we're giving them that care. We're focused on them. We don't have to worry about an ambulance dropping somebody else off who's broken their leg or banged their head, or we can just focus on that person and their needs.
I think the fact that you were talking about people coming back the next day, you ask them to come back, that seems like quite a big thing because, again, that's something that unfortunately A&E aren't able to do. Of
course.
I'm assuming in A&E, if somebody goes in crisis, they're treated as best they can be. And then it's kind of, well, okay, go home.
Yeah.
And that's almost it, I'd imagine. I suppose it's up to that person then to look for other services, where that seems like an important thing to me, to know that somebody is coming back, for you to know that, and for them to know that they're welcome back the next day as well.
Of course. And ultimately, we are a short-term service because we also want to refer people on to something that can really suit them going forward. So we want them to know they can come back to us the next day. You know, we don't want you to take your life tonight. You've got us to come back to tomorrow, and we're going to keep supporting you. But also, this person could be struggling with a lot of debt. They could be struggling because they're struggling with a relationship. Depending on what the criteria is, we can then signpost them, put them on the right pathway, which is what we do, because we're collaborating with so many other organisations and groups that are in the Wigan and Leigh area. So nobody's just like, right, we've stopped you taking your life, bye. That's not what we're doing. And I think that is a massive thing to helping someone's mental health as well. They don't just feel like, you've helped me to this little crisis that I've had. You know, I'm still a statistic. I don't matter. They're not a statistic to us. We know the name. We really care about them. We want them to be okay. And we're not just going to say bye-bye. You know, we want to help them and help them start feeling a lot better soon. And I think that wraparound care is something that can reduce the pressure on services as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's imperative that we do collaborate with other organisations, and that is what we do, have strong partnerships with other people. It's really, really important.
That's really great. And Jasmine, I was going to ask you as well, obviously you're doing a lot of work in the Postvention area. How important do you think it is that, you're coming from this from a lived experience perspective as well? And, is that something you share with people that come in?
Sometimes, yeah. A lot of the time, it's kind of hard to know when to kind of insert that without it taken away from it being their story as such. But sometimes I will share it because I think it's so important to know that people understand. And I know people can say that they understand, but sometimes you think, well, do you? But I think once you've actually heard a little bit of their story as well, I would trust somebody more if I was in that position, I think.
I think we've spoken to quite a lot of people in this series who have that lived experience of being bereaved by suicide, who've gone on to work in this field and help other people, whether that's intervention or postvention. How does that affect you personally, though? Because that must be, they're difficult conversations to have anyway, but with that lived experience.
It's been quite healing for me, to be honest. I mean, one thing I was just thinking when Ellie was speaking about having those returning service users, my partner had been under the NHS crisis team a year before he passed away, and he was kind of discharged around about March, April, I think it must have been. So just a couple of months after, and he never went back and never sought help again. And I just wonder if there had been harbours at that point or something else that was available, that was a walk-in service. You just go at any time, you don't have to book an appointment, don't have to wait for a referral. Things might have been different. So I think being part of that movement and part of Epic Hope, it's quite healing for me because hopefully it can be different for somebody else.
It's amazing that as well. It really makes me emotional hearing Jasmine say that, because a few people have said that. Nina's said that about her brother as well. And that's why it's so important that the harbours are around and that they are saving lives. And even, over Christmas time, we know we saved lives at Christmas. I mean, we heard some heartbreaking stories, but the people are still here. And it's just... Thank goodness, because as I always say, life can be absolutely beautiful, and it's horrible when and I know how it feels to be in that place when you just think your life's worthless and you don't want to be here. But talking about breaking the cycle, it's quite fascinating really, because I was obviously, well, not obvious to you guys, but I think you might know, Jasmine, as I was growing up, my mum was very suicidal as well. And, as I was a child and she was my parenting me, we suffered a lot of trauma. But I find it fascinating because I only just met my sister through my father in 2020. But my sister's been suicidal as well, like most of her life, and we find it fascinating. And I always wonder, what is it? What is it? Is it in families? Is it a nature-nurture thing? I really find it unbelievable sometimes. Like, how do we break the cycle? And then you do worry about your children. You do think, is there something there that makes us more prone to it? Because and I've got this real interest in the brain as well since my accident. So I just find it really fascinating. But here I am trying to break the cycle. And then I found out all that of my sister when we met. But we do have some fascinating conversations about this. Yeah, it's intriguing, really.
It is, and I think research looks at that whole kind of nature-nurture element. I mean, one thing they definitely find is that depending on who you've been bereaved by can also affect the increased risk, so for boys if it's their mum, or for some mums if it's their children. So there's certain relationships that we know can increase risk, but I do agree with you that it's interesting. And there's some families where we can talk about trauma, but there's some where you may think, well, there wasn't those traumas.
Yes.
So what happens there as well?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it is really interesting to kind of think about what maybe happens in the brain as well. And are there some biological reasons for it?
Definitely. Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to just ask you about is, within this series, again, a lot of people who've been on, they have been interviewed in the media. And it feels like in the last couple of years, the news, they really have taken it seriously, whether it's BBC, ITV, they're broadcasting a lot about suicide awareness and suicide prevention. And you've obviously been interviewed a few times. So it'd just be great to kind of hear about your experience and also why you think they're, picking this up now a lot.
I think it's because of me, Pooja.
I can believe that.
Great answer.
I really do think Mike and Tim and Andy, Three Dads Walking, have definitely, brought so much media attention. I just think they're fabulous. But I don't know, because even I've noticed it feels like there's so many more people speaking about suicide prevention, not just mental health, suicide prevention. We have to stop being scared of saying the word suicide. I've never had a problem saying the word suicide because it's been in my life since I was little, the word suicide. So I don't have a fear of saying it. It doesn't have that, I never feel like that when I say it. But we've got to keep saying it and not be frightened of saying it, because we need that to have suicide prevention. And I've noticed that, more and more, the more we speak about it, the more we get rid of the stigma, because we all want to believe that the stigma has gone from mental health and talking about mental health, and it has, but there's so much more work to be done, But I love the fact that the ITV and BBC and even the radio shows are all really pushing, talk about it, share how you're feeling, open up to somebody. Because it is, when you open up to somebody and even start a conversation, it's not that everything's fixed instantly. It's not that all your troubles go away. And it's not even that things don't change in an instant. But when you do open up to one person, you've taken that first step that can make it easier for you to take the next step. And even when you go to a safe space, or go to a group, or go to one of our harbours, or go to Andy's Man Club, or Directions for Men, or all these groups, what you can go to, when you go, you don't always have to speak. You can just sit there and just be, but being in that vicinity and that safe space can really help you to eventually open up. And I think we're all talking about it. And I think the media has realised that everybody's really doing the best to save lives. And they're really coming around and supporting us. And in particular, Mel Barham from Granada TV is very, very supportive of suicide prevention. I think she's absolutely amazing. And I've just had such a good experience with them. They've been really supportive of the work we do and the work that Three Dads Walking are doing. And I think we need the media to help us to spread that word, and for people to see that there is no shame in feeling suicidal. There is no shame in struggling with your mental health. And it doesn't always have to be that way. Eventually, it can get better. I think one thing we have to remember, and I've got to say this, sometimes people think they're on this journey and they have to get better. But you might have suicidal feelings for the rest of your life, but it doesn't mean you can't manage them. So I manage my feelings and my moods and my, so I haven't been suicidal for many years. But maybe I might be again one day, but it's me being prepared, having coping mechanisms. I know what to do to stay alive. So I always say it's not about recovering, it's about learning to manage so that you can have a wonderful life, a good life, a rewarding life, live the best life you can. Anybody can have that, but they've just got to take that first step, get the right support around you. Because you never know what's around the corner, do you? There's so many amazing people that you could have in your life. You don't have to do this alone.
I mean, that couldn't be a better way to end it, could there? That was amazing.
Sorry.
It's amazing. Everything you've said, I think is so true. And I think it gives hope to a lot of people.
Epic hope.
One thing I was thinking when you was talking as well is like, sometimes saving lives is complicated and it's hard. Yeah. But with suicide prevention, it's literally having a conversation. Even like the interventions that we do, it's not always complicated.
No. It's not what you think all the time, is it?
No.
Oh, well, the work you're doing is amazing. And thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Let's Talk Hope, a podcast series aiming to end the stigma around suicide. Brought to you by Professor Pooja Saini, head of the Suicide and Self-Harm Research Group at Liverpool John Moores University. If you or someone you know has been affected by any of the issues discussed in this episode, please refer to the help and resources listed in the show notes for details of organisations that can provide support. This podcast was produced by Inabella Media and hosted by me, Gemma Cutting. Thanks for listening.